Hello! In this video, I will discuss Affordable Care Act reporting, what's new for tax year 2016 filing. Congratulations! You made it through the first year of mandatory Affordable Care Act, or better known as ACA reporting. Now what? I will cover the following topics in this video. What's new for tax year 2016, what's changed for tax year 2016, and finally, the tax year 2016 filing deadlines. One of the biggest changes for tax year 2016 is that the Good Faith Effort Clause no longer applies. For tax year 2015 reporting, IRS announced that it would not impose penalties on a filer for reporting incorrect or incomplete information if the filer could show that it made a good faith effort to comply with the information reporting requirements. Since this good faith effort is no longer applicable for tax year 2016, it is even more critical to understand and comply with the filing requirements to avoid potential penalties. Now let's look at Form 1095-C and the changing and new codes for Line 14. Line 14 is the offer of coverage. Remember, the code on Line 14 does not necessarily match the coverage in which the employee is enrolled. For example, let's say that an employee is offered family coverage, but the employee enrolls in employee-only coverage. Line 14 should indicate that the employee was offered family coverage. Line 14 is all about the offer. For tax year 2016, there are two new codes, Codes 1J and 1K. Code 1J is minimum essential coverage, providing minimum value offered to the employee and at least minimum essential coverage conditionally offered to the spouse. Minimum essential coverage is not offered to the dependents. Code 1K is minimum essential coverage, providing minimum value offered to the employee, at least minimum essential coverage offered to the dependents, and at least minimum essential coverage conditionally offered to the spouse. Now, what is a conditional offer? A conditional offer is an offer of coverage that is subject to one or more reasonable objective conditions. For example, an offer to cover an employee's spouse only if the spouse is not eligible for coverage under Medicare or a group health plan sponsored by another employer is a conditional offer. So, for example, if the plan offers coverage to the employee and dependents and conditionally offers coverage to the spouse, the correct entry on line 14 is 1K. An employer may report a conditional offer to a spouse as an offer of coverage, regardless of whether the spouse meets the reasonable objective condition. Codes 1J and 1K slightly change codes 1D and 1E. 1D is still minimum essential coverage, providing minimum value offered to the employee and at least minimum essential coverage offered to the spouse, but not the dependents. However, there is a clarification that 1D should not be used if the coverage for the spouse was offered conditionally. Instead, use Code 1J. Likewise, Code 1E is still minimum essential coverage, providing minimum value offered to the employee and at least minimum essential coverage offered to both the dependents and the spouse. However, the clarification is that 1E should not be used if the coverage for the spouse was offered conditionally. In this case, use Code 1K. Another change for tax year 2016 is that Code 1I is no longer applicable. Code 1I was for the qualifying offer transition relief for 2015. On Form 1095-C, an amount needs to be entered on line 15, which is the employee required contribution, if either Code 1J or 1K are entered on line 14, in addition to the other applicable codes that required an amount on line 15 last year, which were codes 1B, 1C, 1D, and 1E. Lastly, Code 2I is no longer applicable for line 16 on Form 1095-C. Code 2I was for the non-calendar year transition relief. Next, let's look at the Covered Individuals section on Form 1095-C. This section is completed for any individual enrolled in coverage. The language in the Covered Individuals section for tax year 2016 now reads, if employer provided self-insured coverage, check the box and enter the information for each individual enrolled in coverage, including the employee. This new language should help to clarify that Part 3 of Form 1095-C should include the employee if the employee enrolled in coverage, along with any other individuals who are enrolled in coverage. If an employee waives coverage, there should be no covered individuals to report in Part 3. Now let's move on to Form 1094C. On line 22, Certifications of Eligibility, Box B is no longer applicable for tax year 2016. Box B was for the Qualifying Offer Method Transition Relief. Box C on the same line now is only applicable for non-calendar year plans and only for the months in 2016 that fall in the 2015 plan year. Box C is for Section 4980H Transition Relief, which is a form of penalty relief. On Part 3, Column B, IRS added the words Section 4980H to the column heading to provide more clarification. It now reads Section 4980H Full-Time Employee Count for ALE Member. For ACA purposes, a full-time employee is one who works on average 30 hours per week or 130 service hours per month. It is important to remember that when conducting the employee count for Column B in Part 3 of Form 1094C, that you count any employees who meet this ACA definition of a full-time employee. For Part 3, Column E, which is the Section 4980H Transition Relief Indicator, this is now only applicable for non-calendar year plans and only for months in 2016 that fall in the 2015 plan year. This ties to Box C on line 22 mentioned earlier. Lastly, for Part 4, which is the listing of the other ALE members of an aggregated ALE group, IRS clarified that the reporting ALE member should not be listed. For example, let's say that there are 3 members of an aggregated ALE group, companies A, B, and C. On Company A's 1094C, only companies B and C are listed in Part 4 and not Company A. Lastly, the deadlines for filing 1095 forms are as follows. January 31, 2017 is the due date to submit 1095s to employees and recipients. February 28, 2017 is the due date to submit 1095s to IRS on paper. And March 31, 2017 is the due date to submit 1095s to IRS electronically. File at yearly.com or call to speak with an ACA filing expert at 800-968-1099. Thank you.